Hey everybody, I'm going to do a round the world update today. It is July 20th, Saturday morning. I just got the lights turned on. So you can see here in the pond we've got loads and loads of duckweed on the surface. That was from some tank maintenance I was doing last night on my Friday night live stream. Unfortunately the live stream froze up on us and we had to end early. And so I thought I would come around today and just do a quick round the world update and catch everybody up on what's going on with some of my tanks. So not a lot to talk about, honestly. Everything's just kind of been ticking over. I haven't been adding any new fish. I haven't been doing any experiments or anything. So we do have one, I'm going to call it a flower. I know somebody's going to correct me. I know technically that is a bract, but we're going to call it a flower on my peace lily here. That's going to be opening any day now. Of course, you can see my pothos plant is growing out of control back here. The yellow area here, I believe, is just from getting too much light. I don't believe that is a nutrient deficiency or anything. Of course, we can see all the new growth out here on the ends looks really good. All the growth back here looks good. And, of course, all of the growth around on that side looks good. So I'm chalking this yellow up to a little too much light. And you can also see, sort of hiding in here in the pothos plant, I do have another peace lily back here. Moss, everything's doing really well over here. I have terrestrial moss. I also have Java moss. It's hard to tell the difference, but this is terrestrial moss over here, and this is Java moss. This is what Java moss looks like when it's growing out of the water. And I do have a water sprite down here that is growing well enough. Water sprite is also a type of fern. A lot of people don't realize that, but water sprite is also known as Indian fern and can do just fine growing out of the water. You can grow that terrestrially as long as it's got plenty of moisture for its roots. So everything is going pretty well with the pond. I will need to get in there and change the filter out and probably clean out the pump. That looks like it's getting a little bit clogged up. We don't have a ton of water flow right there at the moment, but that's probably just some roots or some debris or whatever getting caught in the intake pump. And so that is about it for the pond. We're going to go ahead and turn this light off so we have less glare on some of the other tanks as we go around the room. And then we will come right over here to my 29 miscellaneous and start from here. So not a whole lot going on in here as usual. It's really not a whole lot going on in any of my tanks. We have one new fish to talk about. And that's going to be about it in this video as far as updates. Otherwise, we're basically just going to be having a look at some of my tanks. So my 29 miscellaneous, you can see, is doing well. Everything's lush and green. At some point, I will have to get in there again and do some plant removal. I do that about once a year, maybe. I do not get very much in the way of plant growth in this tank, and that is simply because we don't have very much lighting in this tank. It's just the little stock LEDs that come with the hood, and they don't produce a ton of light. And when you don't produce a ton of light, you don't get a ton of plant growth. So 29's just ticking over. Not a whole lot to talk about with that one. My gourami tank got some maintenance last night. I did a really big water change. I got the glass wiped down. I removed a bunch of excessive Java moss. You can see the piece of woodwork here in the middle that has the Java moss growing all over it, and the piece of woodwork on the right that has the Java moss growing all over it. As of last night, both of those were so bushy you couldn't even see the woodwork or the underlying structure. So I got in there and I removed a bunch of that. I got a bunch of mulm and stuff off the bottom, got the glass cleaned up. We removed a bunch of floating duckweed, and I also removed a bunch of baby water sprites. So we got the tank top opened up again. We can actually see through the water. We're getting some light shining down in there, and everything is looking good. Looks like I probably should have removed this frond here because that looks dead, but under the circumstances, I'm glad I got as much work as I did last night. Again, the live stream seized up on me in the middle. I was trying to manage the water change and manage trying to get the live stream going again at the same time, and it didn't work, so we ended the live stream. I finished up my tank maintenance and we called it a night. So there you go, everybody. That is a look at the 55-gallon gourami tank. If we move on, let me get my tripod out of the way. Move on to my 55-gallon tank. Not a whole lot going on in here, other than we're just patiently waiting for this crypt to take over the tank. I do have somebody that wants some crypt, and if I hear from them, I get an email or whatever, I will get in here and remove some of it. We can go into the back of the tank and pull some of the trailers and runners out along the back glass. I do have a power head in the bottom over there, and that is ideally sort of blowing water across the back of the tank towards the filter intake, which is over here, and it keeps all the detritus and stuff from building up in the back of the tank. So allowing for water flow back there is important, and getting in there from time to time and pulling some of this crypt out that's growing all the way up to the back glass will be a benefit to the tank. And so even though I am trying to let this fill in and cover the whole tank, I do still need to get in there from time to time and do a little bit of removal. I also need to get in here and start removing some of that Java moss, because that stuff just grows on everything, and I don't want that taking over this tank. And so we're gonna get in there and remove some of that next time I do a water change. As far as those spots you can see on the side of that discus, I was had those pointed out to me the other day. Those marks have been on that discus since he went in this tank. This is the one that was getting bullied in the main discus tank. Apparently he's a shy violet and doesn't want to be on camera today. But that one was getting bullied, and that's why it got moved into this tank. And those marks are from that bullying. They have never gone away. They've never cleared up. So those are just scars from the treatment of the other discus in my main discus tank. So that is about all that's going on in there. Here's another tank that we did a little bit of maintenance on last night, but that was simply removing a bunch of duckweed and topping the tank off. We didn't really do a whole lot in the way of maintenance in there. I didn't get in there and wipe the glass down or clean out any old plants or anything like that. So once again, not a lot to talk about, just kind of ticking over. Now, if you'll remember, quite a while ago, probably over a year ago, this tank was going through some really tough times. It had a lot of hair algae in it. For a long time, I didn't even have any fish in it, and I was just kind of waiting to let it sort its own issues out. And I put a Siamese algae eater in there, I put some nearite snails in there, and slowly we began restocking it. And without ever doing anything to the algae other than adding those animals and changing the way I fed it and changing the way I did maintenance on it, and you can look in there now, and of course you can see how absolutely beautiful everything looks. We've got no hair algae growing pretty much anywhere on anything. I know it's a little tough to look in the top when all you've got is duckweed growing on the surface, but as you look in there, you can see that there's no hair algae really growing on anything. In fact, there's not a lot of algae at all. You can see a little bit of a green blush on that rock right there. That, of course, is algae. But even the woodwork, the rocks in the back, everything in there just looks really, really good. And so that is a combination between the Siamese algae eaters, which I don't believe are in there anymore. I've got a rubber lip pleco that lives in this cave down here on the bottom. You can almost make him out through all the glare and reflection. And of course I've got the nearite snails in there that do a great job with the algae as well. And by doing nothing other than changing my maintenance and changing my feeding routine, we've got the tank looking like this again. Took a long time to do it, so if you want instant gratification and you want algae and stuff out of your tank immediately, then you got to put some elbow grease into it. But if you're patient and you don't mind just waiting for things to happen, you can actually manage algae naturally just by how you actually maintain and manage and feed the tank. So that is my 40 breeder. We're going to move on to my other 125 Darrell, which I know that joke doesn't entirely work. We had a discussion about that the other day. If you're old enough to get that joke, then it works just fine for you. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then it doesn't matter anyway. But this is my other 125 Darrell. And right now, everybody's just laying low. As a rule, most of you see my tanks during feeding time, whether I'm doing a feeding video or it's actually just during one of my live streams, which I do twice a week, every Friday and Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, if you're interested in that. And for members, I do a Wednesday members only live stream. So if you are interested in my live streams, you can check that out. Otherwise, most people get to see my tanks when they're being fed. When they're not being fed and the fish are just doing their fish thing, this is kind of what they do. This is what I typically see when I come in and look at my tanks. The fish are just kind of down there hanging out. They're not really doing a lot. They're not really being active, wasting a bunch of energy. Fish don't just like run around like they've got the zoomies all day, unless you're a danio. The danios never stop zooming. But most fish don't. Most fish just kind of hang out, and they don't waste a bunch of energy until food's in the tank, and then they waste a lot of energy. Or I should say they use a lot of energy. I wouldn't call it a waste necessarily, but they use a lot of energy once the food goes in the tank. So you may have noticed this loose end on this piece of Anubias right here. This is indeed just floating. I have somebody that wants a large piece of Anubias, and since this is just free floating anyway, I thought maybe this piece of Anubias right here is what I could give them. So let's get that back in the water. It's bumping into my woodwork down here and I couldn't put it in there properly. So that piece of Anubias is going to be sold, and then this Anubias down here will continue growing. And yes, this is Anubias growing up and out of the tank, although again with all this really bright lighting or whatever, the Anubias doesn't do too well under all that. So this tank I have recently, it's my white suckerfish down there. For as subdued and boring looking as that fish is, just kind of a grayish brownish looking fish, I do get a lot of comments and compliments on that white suckerfish. That is a native fish, and with the exception of two little gambusia I have swimming around here up near the surface. Gambusia are very much like, you can think of them as like wild guppies. They're very closely related to guppies. There's one of them now. So I have two of them in the tank that just won't seem to die like guppies. They only live a few years, but I've had these in here for about 4 or 5 years now. And they're the last two, and they're just hanging on. And those are the last of my native fish, with the exception of that white suckerfish. And I have no idea what the lifespan on those white suckerfish is supposed to be. And so I don't know if that's living a long time or not, but I've had it for about 5 or 6 years at least. Probably even longer than that now, because time really does get away from me. So here's just sort of a look at the overall fish room from the corner. You'll notice I recently, well, it hasn't been that recently, but I did take down, I used to have some black drapes hanging back there to sort of separate my workout area from the rest of the room. But when I'm out there working out, I actually like to be able to look into the back of the tank and everything. So pulling that drape down has given me more view of my fish room. And so that's why we walked around the back. I figured I'd share that sort of rearward view of this tank with you. Moving on, looking at my snail tank. Not a lot to talk about, just breeding snails for butterbean. You can see it's got plenty of snails in there. And then all these little white specks and little smudgy stuff you see all over the glass, those are in fact snail eggs. And so we have no shortage of snails for butterbean here in the future. Moving on to my 40-gallon fancy goldfish tank, or as I'm beginning to think of it, as my blup blup tank. I got a new filter in here. And it sounds like a stupid little putt-putt car or something, so this is becoming my blup blup tank. I don't know if I'm going to do something about that or not. It really does get on my nerves, but at the same time it gives me something to talk about, so I don't know. We'll probably just leave it there. So, fancy goldfish, not much going on in here. I wiped the glass down recently. We did top the tank off last night, so it's nice and clear. And you can see what's going on in there with everybody. So, my goldfish are Melissa fish. This one is Wednesday. Wednesday is my fanciest fish by far. That is a fancy peacock fantail oranda. And she is absolutely stunning. She is my fanciest fish. As I said, I was given her as a gift by a longtime viewer. and I daren't even imagine what they paid for this fish, but it is a very, very fancy goldfish, and she is beautiful. And I do say she because this one has been sexed. I know that she is female. No idea about the other ones. I usually just refer to them as a him or a her. This one is Melissa fish, so that typically gets referred to as her simply because the name. And then this one, likewise, I named Bruce Brown. You may or may not know who Bruce Brown is, doesn't really matter, but that is Bruce Brown. And since I named it Bruce Brown, we call that one a he. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter because they're fish. So anyway, that is my fancy goldfish tank. And we're going to move on now to my discus tank. You can see my tenopoma and some of the discus are hanging out back here in the bushy end of the tank. So this is the only tank that really needs work. If you look in here, I haven't ordered any yet, but you can see that sort of dark green growing on the rocks. We have some more of it growing on the valve right here. I guess this is crypt again. And you can see it's a little bit growing on the rocks. We have some on the bottom, a little bit growing on the glass. So that is cyanobacteria. And I do want to get in there and get on top of it before it starts growing too out of control. It's not too problematic. It's not dangerous. It's not harmful to the fish. It's not harmful to me or my pets or anything like that. I know a lot of people think that cyanobacteria is deadly and toxic and all that kind of stuff, and certain species of cyanobacteria can be, but what I've got growing in my aquariums, if it was dangerous, I'd have been dead a decade ago, so I'm not too concerned about it from a health standpoint. But visually, it's kind of boogering the tank up. It doesn't look real great. You can see I got it growing in the Java up here on the top. There's some more growing on that. I would imagine if we actually lifted this up and look in here, well, it's not too bad. And of course, look at that, I got duckweed growing in here too. So, duckweed galore. My slapping pads aren't really up for slapping. They're not really very big at the moment, but hopefully my red tiger lotus will start flourishing and growing in again. I used to get lots of flowers on this. I had great big slapping pads, and now it just seems to be really stunted and small. So maybe I do need to start adding some nutrients to the tank. I don't feed my tanks. I don't put root tabs or ferts or foods or anything like that in there. I just let my tanks grow all natural, and they generally look pretty bushy. So the other thing we need to do, if you had not noticed, is all this grunge on the glass. You can see where the plecos get on there and scrape, or possibly that's snails making their way around it. But there's a lot of growth on the glass that needs to get in there. I was going to do that on my Sunday night live stream tomorrow, but I might get in there tonight and do it, and then Sunday we can just hang out and not have to worry about any fish tank maintenance at all. But we'll have to play that one by ear. So that is what's going on with the discus tank. Again, the only tank at the moment that really needs any kind of maintenance. Now we move on to my 20-gallon Betta fish tank. This is Gilgalad's tank. And right now we can actually see my little clown pleco. And also, if you see that little brown twig on the bottom, that is my, well, you can see my purple slippers. That is my banjo catfish that likes to bury itself in the sand. And we seldom see it, but that's what that is. And that, of course, is my clown pleco, which I always forgets in this tank. Not exactly sure where Gilgalad is at the moment. He obviously has plenty of places to hide in this tank. Very soon, I hope next week, we're going to be getting rid of this big piece of Java fern here. I got somebody that wants to purchase it from me, and so we're going to get that shipped off when the weather cools down a little bit. Look, you can see it's even starting to put out little baby growth, and the babies are coming out broadleafed, even though once we grow emergent, it gets real fine like this, and it looks more almost like an evergreen as opposed to the big broadleaf fern. But look, you can see it's even putting out babies on the tips out here, and as the babies come out, they've got those broad leaves on them. And that's how they develop. A little rootlet will start right there. You'll see roots start to develop off of it. Eventually this will get big enough that it'll just simply break free, or you can separate it yourself. I could pull that off of there right now and it would be its own little plant, but in time that will get bigger and bigger, and eventually this frond that it is connected to will die off, and then the babies that are attached to that frond will then just grow and separate and become free individual plants. Got some more growing right there. That's another little baby that's starting. You can even see the little tiny bit of root starting to develop right there. So that is my Java fern, water sprite, and hopefully this big piece of water sprite and all of these roots and everything in here, all this huge mass of roots is going to get taken out of there. This tank is really tough to look into because the way that light, it comes out, and just standing right in front of the tank, you can see how brightly lit everything is, and of course that immediately just glares right onto the tank. That is the main reason I have these big hoods that I've built over it, so I can have both the effect of having the lights well above the surface of the water, but not ruin the area with light pollution. I never did that on this tank down here, and it really makes a lot of light in the room. So maybe someday we'll build some sort of canopy or something over that. Although for that tank I don't really mind it. I don't know why. That tank just seems to look okay with the lights like that. Anyway, moving on to my quarantine tank. Happy to see that he is out. That is my newest little catfish. He's got adorable little white barbels on his chin. And I thought when I first got him that it was a mad tom, but upon further investigation and some help with a few of my friends, we've gotten some really good close-up pictures of him. I've gotten some really good pictures of his fins, and I believe we have identified him as a baby bullhead. Now, whether it's the yellow bullhead or the brown bullhead, I'm not sure. I know to say that it will be a yellow bullhead is kind of silly based on what it looks like, but coloration notwithstanding, you never know with local coloration or change of color as they age. It's entirely possible that this could be a yellow bullhead, even though it looks very dark. I still think it's the brown, but we don't know for sure yet, but it's pretty much definitely identified as a bullhead at this point. And it's interesting, it's hard to tell from the angle we're seeing it, but it's hanging off the edge of that rock. It was basically like planking. It had its tail on the rock, and then the whole rest of its body was extended just out in the water column over the edge of the rock. So that was pretty cool looking. So there you go, everybody. That is my new catfish. It is a baby bullhead. Bullheads get 6 to 12 inches. So it's not entirely unlikely that that might stay small enough for me to keep it throughout its entire life. I'll just have to figure out where I'm going to put it. Don't know that one yet. So moving on to last but certainly not least is Butterbean, my figure 8 puffer. Here we'll go ahead and get that forward light turned on in the tank so you can see him a little better. So you can see for once, his tank looks nice and clean. I did not wipe the glass down while we were in there last night, but I did get in with the siphon, and we got a bunch of the dead, empty snail shells off of the bottom. We got a bunch of the dead plant material that was in there gone. We removed a bunch of duckweed. We got rid of a lot of the hair algae that was in the back, and just got the tank generally cleaned up and did a 10-gallon water change on it. So Butterbean should be nice and fat and happy this morning. He's waiting for his nummies. Every time I come in here and turn the light on, he thinks he's getting fed. But you can see his belly's nice and white. It's nice and full and round. So even though he is still having issues with his teeth, they're not fully grown out yet. I mean, they're not fully worn down yet. His teeth were growing too long and he was having difficulty eating. And so I've been giving him lots and lots and lots of snails in an attempt to just wear his teeth down rather than to have to get in there and do surgery and trim his teeth manually. which would be what I would have to do if I can't get the teeth to get worn down. Now, I'm not going to do surgery on him unless I absolutely have to. And at this point, you can see he is still eating. He does have a nice round belly. And again, it looks like his teeth are getting smaller, not bigger. And so hopefully with a lot of snails and plenty of stuff to chew on, we can get his teeth back down into some kind of more reasonable length without me having to get in there and do a surgery. So there you go, everybody. That is about it. We have made it all the way around the world. So thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed your little trip. I know it's been a while. But make sure you're subscribed, and that way when I do post these videos from time to time, and I'm not going to lie, it won't be terribly often anymore. I'm not real enthusiastic about shooting the YouTube videos a whole lot, but I will, from time to time, catch everybody up and do one of these round the worlds at least, so everybody can stay up to date with what's going on, even if you don't watch my live streams, which I highly encourage you to do every Friday night and Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you follow my live streams, you'll already know what's going on in all of my tanks and everything. So thanks again for joining me. See you real soon in the next one.